Hallo zusammen. Before talking about all the other songs on Rammstein's new album Zeit, let's also talk about the third single more in depth. I've already talked about Zeit, Zickzack, and I've also reacted to the whole album, so this one will focus on the lyrics to Angst, fear, and what this song might be about. It's quite interesting actually, so let's check it out. Before I'm gonna dive into the song's lyrics, a little disclaimer: this song may deal with triggering topics such as violence, crime, death, loss, depression, xenophobia, and more. Angst is both a pretty unusual but also predictable choice for a single, I think. How can that be, you might ask? Isn't that contradicting itself? Well, to me, I gotta admit that even though the music is still pretty solid once again, it's not a hit-driven type of track with lots of hooky, catchy melodies and harmonies. On the other hand, this song, Angst, couldn't be more fitting in terms of the Zeitgeist. The Zeitgeist, it's der Zeitgeist. Literally translated, it's the time spirit, so to speak. The spirit of the times. What is unique, important, relevant, profound about the times we live in right now? That is der Zeitgeist. Apart from that, it's a German loanword that found its way into the English language, so you might be familiar with it, but be careful with its pronunciation in German because it is slightly different, because it's a Z with a more sharper sound, if you will. Whereas in English, it would rather be Zeit. But it's Zeit, die Zeit. In this case, I think the song is directly related to both recent and partially universal and, sadly, reoccurring themes and topics, which make the lyrics even more profound and relevant in my book. The song's title basically says it all. Die Angst, singular. Die Ängste, plural. The fear. A broad topic which you can notice multiple times throughout the lyrics, and pretty much every one of us can relate to this topic in some way or another. But let's first start with the beginning of the song. I guess you could perceive and comprehend the initial sound you're hearing in this song, the du, or whatever that is, as du, the second person singular personal pronoun informal, which is you in English. And to be honest, I don't know if that's supposed to be like that. Maybe because, it could be some sort of like a blaming, accusing kind of do, you let yourself be controlled by fear here and there. Maybe. Probably. It could be that, but on the other hand, it could also be just, an example of onomatopoeia, if you will, of, painting with sounds. In this case, the sound one makes when scaring people, All of a sudden, you're scaring someone, and we all know that, and it's no different in German actually. The first verse goes like this. Wenn die Kinder unerzogen, schon der Vater hat gedroht, der schwarze Mann, wird dich holen, wenn du nicht folgst meinem Gebot. To be honest, I wouldn't advise to use this song for learning a typical German word order or syntax, meaning a sentence's structure, since they appear to be rather elliptic and poetic in parts, which of course also has some appeal in its own right. A good example for an ellipsis would be the first line. Compared to how Germans would express this in Standard or High German, even colloquially speaking, this phrase is missing the second part of the verbal phrase, unerzogen sein, to be uneducated or ill-bred. In particular, the conjugated form of the auxiliary verb sein, to be, in the third person plural, sind. In Standard German, it would have to be wenn die Kinder unerzogen sind, when the children are ill-bred, so the R is basically missing, if you will. The fourth line is a good example of an altered and rather poetic word order. In Standard German, this conditional subordinate clause would be wenn du meinem Gebot nicht folgst. Regarding German subordinate clauses, the conjugated verb is commonly placed at the end, whereas in Till's line, its placement within the subordinate clause strongly reminds of how an English speaker would express this, if you don't follow my commandment. This first verse seems to indicate how raising children in a very paternalistic way, meaning everything the father says has to be obeyed and they are always in the right, automatically speaking, how that works. Through high expectation standards and especially inducing fear, albeit it being irrational and therefore unrealistic and unfounded, the father tries to achieve, and sometimes those people do achieve, total control of their children early on in life. And I feel what's especially tragic about this one all too often is that that behavior might get adopted by those children later on in life, and when they are a parent, they might act the same way, even though they should know better. The pre-chorus goes like this. Und das glauben wir bis heute. So in Angst sind Land und Leute. Etwas Schlimmes wird geschehen. Das Böse kommt, wird nicht mehr gehen. This pre-chorus both continues what I just mentioned, and it also broadens the overall perspective and slightly shifts it away from a father and their child to society and a culture, a more general point of view. What's also really interesting about the song in a linguistic way, on a linguistic level of things, is that unlike many other Rammstein songs by Till Lindemann, this one isn't written in the ego perspective. It's not from, the lyrical I, so to speak. It's more like an observer type of perspective, a third-person perspective that is describing things. And in some instances, for instance, in the pre-choruses, we also shift to a we perspective, And in this case, it's pretty much a collective lyrical I, if you will, We all have to do with fears here and there, some more, some less, but we all know fear. Usually, I'm not the biggest fan of generalizations, since more often than not they express things too shallow and sometimes even wrongfully so. In this instance, however, I feel it's relatively fair to use the we, since in different ways this fearful Indoctrination, die Indoctrination, singular, die Indoctrinationen, plural, the indoctrination of children early on in their lives was, and from what I have seen, read or heard from others, sometimes still is a recurring, seemingly educational method for some parents. This pre-chorus also speaks of sort of an everlasting, always subconsciously present main level of fear, a fear of something bad or evil could happen anytime out of the blue. The last line also implies that once the evil has landed, so to speak, there seemingly would be a form of universal Hilflosigkeit, die Hilflosigkeit, only singular, helplessness, and a loss of die Kontrolle, singular, die Kontrollen, plural, the control over the situation. And to be clear here, even though I guess a huge portion of fear includes irrationalities, fear of potential situations and contexts which sometimes are highly unlikely to happen in the first place, basically a fear of das Unbekannte, mostly singular, unknown. There are also variations of fear that are rooted in real scenarios, such as politics or, as the whole world has been experiencing as of late, a pandemic, which to some degree also counts as an unknown factor in parts of the world, while being rooted in known factors, viruses per se. And I totally get when people are afraid of these things, it's only natural. I think things become especially problematic when fear is abused as a tool of power, and when people don't get help with their fear, or when people don't seek help, regarding their fear and overcoming it. And when people abuse fear as a tool of power, including spreading it willingly, that is really dangerous. And in general, I think it's really problematic when people don't have a high resilience, but rather a low resilience. Die Resilienz, singular, die Resilienzen, plural. The chorus features a wording which I've also addressed before in other videos, for instance in my reaction to the song and the music video in specific, but I'm gonna go more in depth about that later on in this video, once we've proceeded to the bridge. Und die Furcht wächst in die Nacht. Tür und Tore sind bewacht. Die Rücken nass, die Hände klamm. Alle haben Angst vom schwarzen Mann. It's a pretty uncommon chorus in that, apart from the last line, it doesn't carry a lot of hooky melodies and rather sounding a bit brooding and moody, which fits the expressed context though. The semantic connection of fear and night, die Nacht, singular, die Nächte, plural, works really well and kind of harkens back to other tracks, especially Schwarz, black, but more about that one in another video soon, so stay tuned for that. Similar to the quote, "The night is dark and full of terrors" by author George R.R. Martin and Game of Thrones, the night with its darkness is the perfect metaphor for fear, fear of the unknown, what's in the dark, what you can't see, grasp, what you can't understand, and the feeling of not having control. When you think about it, it's quite ironic the father tries to control their child with fear, but maybe just maybe, the father is afraid himself because he feels like he doesn't have the control and therefore needs to use fear. So it's pretty much a vicious circle in a way. Fear leads to more fear, or in other words, he tries to fight fire with fire. He tries to get away from fear and being afraid of not having control by using fear and basically forcing control upon the child. Not the best solution, I don't think. That's another danger of fear. It often leads people, especially with low resilience or self-esteem, self-belief, into der Teufelskreis, singular, die Teufelskreise, plural, into a vicious circle, which literally means the devil's circle, by the way. For der Teufel, singular, die Teufel, plural, the devil, and der Kreis, singular, die Kreise, plural, the circle. Verse number 2 goes like this. In Dunkelheit schleicht heran. Bist du nicht brav, fasst dich an. Traue keinem Fremden dann, so viel Albtraum, so viel Wahn. I guess this links back to the first verse and the father, but this time he takes it a step further and seems to get physically violent when the child won't obey his commands. Again, the darkness, die Dunkelheit, mostly singular, gets mentioned in relation to fear. Here it might be implying and expressing how that violence may come out of nowhere, basically as die Überraschung, singular, die Überraschungen, plural, the surprise. Line 3 reminds of a common word of advice parents give to their children: do not trust strangers. Line 4 expresses how experiencing fear is a nightmare-inducing situation. By the way, the English term nightmare originates from a German mythical creature called der Nachtmar, or der Nachtalb, with B or P, a creature who sits on people's chest when they are asleep and therefore it evokes bad dreams in them. Especially the alternate name Nachtalb itself also leads to the common German equivalent for nightmare, which is der Albtraum, singular, die Albträume, plural, again with a B or a P, and even though the spelling is different, the pronunciation is the same. The last part of line 4 indicates the dangerous aspect of too much fear. Once your personal fear reservoir is full, you may not be able to think clearly and fall victim to der Wahn, mostly singular, luckily, delusion. The second pre-chorus is slightly different to the first one, albeit similar in semantic quality. Und so glauben wir bis heute, schwer bewaffnet ist die Meute. Ach, sie können es nicht lassen, schreien Feuer in die Gassen. Again, Till Lindemann as the lyricist chose the lyrical I to be a lyrical we or us by using wir, we, as the first person plural personal pronoun, both informal and formal by the way. Within the song's progression, the lyrics also build up a certain dangerous potential. In this case, the fear has reached another level. People arm themselves and trust is on a new low. The noun die Meute, singular, die Meuten, plural, the pack, is pretty pejorative and adds an outside perspective other people that are not affected by fear may have on those fear-infected groups. This shift in perspective, basically to an observer from the outside, a third person, becomes even clearer in line 3, which not only contains the interjection ach, oh, expressing die Ratlosigkeit, mostly singular, perplexity or helplessness, and the descriptive personal pronoun sie, they, in the third person plural. Line 4 implies a high risk of immense Gefahr, die Gefahr, singular, die Gefahren, plural, the danger, and a high potential of excessive Gewalt, die Gewalt, here mostly singular, violence. The second chorus is similar to the first, but the second line has changed. Und die Furcht wächst in die Nacht. Gar kein Auge zugemacht. Der Rücken nass, die Hände klamm, alle haben Angst vorm schwarzen Mann. Translated rather literally, the second line means didn't close any eye at all, in the sense of not being able to calm down, to think rational, and to get some rest and sleep because of the omnipresent fear of potential danger. And finally, as I've mentioned before and kinda teased, we have arrived at the bridge of this song and the centerpiece wording, if you will, the center phrase, the core, the meat of this whole song, in my opinion, lyrically speaking. And this is it. Wer hat Angst vorm schwarzen Mann? Wer hat Angst? Now, you may have noticed that the German der Schwarze Mann usually gets translated to the boogeyman in English. In fact, it's the German phrasal equivalent to the term and the basic idea of the boogeyman being a personification of fear and especially fear of the unknown and uncontrollable. However, and this adds a whole other, yet still closely linked meta-context, translated literally, der Schwarze Mann also means the black man. And I guess in this specific context of this specific song, that person of color is used as a synonym to xenophobia, which is the fear of strangers and strange unknown things basically. Racism, discrimination and the like. This additionally implied context makes the song even more relevant in my opinion, so I'm glad they chose this song as a single even though, as I've said before, it may not carry the most addictive melodies in the chorus and other parts of the track. It's not a typically single music-wise. The question, wer hat Angst vorm, meaning vor dem schwarzen Mann, it's a common contraction in this case. That is an old German saying, and even though it's mainly meant in reference to the boogeyman and fear of the unknown, for instance a child being afraid to sleep in the dark because there may be a monster under the bed, it sadly also ties in with current times. I could be wrong about this, I'm German, and from my German perspective, because the song isn't rich melodically speaking, you know, the music is cool and all, it's typically Rammstein, but it doesn't stand out musically all too much, I don't think, compared to other songs on the album and by Rammstein in general. So I feel this song is more focused on the lyrical side of things. But because of that, and because many people might not be able to, you know, comprehend the lyrics because they might not understand German and know German enough to do that, they might dislike this song more. That's my thesis, you know, my theory about this. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Also, some of you might have seen a new and really practical, useful thing on this channel because it's so immediate actually, which is super thanks are now activated. That is the heart symbol with the $sign underneath the video screen, which is pretty much a direct tipping possibility for you guys. So that potential support is greatly appreciated, as well as Patreon, you know, becoming a patron and supporting my work on YouTube that way. That is really, really helpful and I'm really, really grateful. So thank you very much. And now, thanks for watching everyone. I'm your Vlog Dave. Tschüss und bis zum nächsten Mal.